On all of our sessions by doing a look back at the previous session. So we're going to take a peek back at the fourth session. And I'm going to, you have copies on the table of most of that, but I'm just going to kind of go through this. How many people do we have online, Henry? 9 people online. Well, that's probably the highest number that we've had, and we've got 24 in the sanctuary. So that's a pretty good turnout compared to some other times. So that's great. Thank you for being here. So on the fourth session after church last Sunday, we had 16 in the sanctuary, and we had 7 on Zoom for a total of 23 people. The opening music was by Tony, and Mary Parker provided the reflection. The gathering reaffirmed the faithful path, that covenant that we just did. And here's a correction that I want, a recap of 3 was shared, paper copies were distributed at the gathering, and early report was emailed to the congregation. This is a correction because I misspoke, and I was told I misspoke, and so I believe that when you make a mistake that you need to correct it. And so the format that we're using in the facilitation was approved by the one board as a Walkerized version of the faithful path. That was a group decision by Walker leadership, and that is the process we are using. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear because I misspoke last time. We shared the decisions and progress so far. The ranked choice vote in the first one, we didn't even go to ranking because there were 17 votes to stay a United Methodist Church and 13 to become a fellowship, and those are very close. So in the second one, we had 17 votes that went for interim clergy and 7 votes for credentialed clergy. The gathered filled out a written feedback handout, and we had table talk discussion. During that group talkback session, several members shared their thoughts about the process and what they liked and what they did not like. It was a healthy opportunity to vent. Those attending by Zoom were also able to verbally participate thanks to the wonders of technology and the skills and gifts of the person who's taking care of that technology. The written feedback responses were tabulated and are attached to this report. At the end of the session, 2 documents, the 4 building options and the proposal from New City Church were handed out to provide more information prior to our next meeting. They will be emailed out to community members, and that has happened. And I want to say thank you to Howard for being really good about communicating. One of the pieces that's so important in this process is transparency, and we need to let everybody know what's going on, and it's all above board. This meeting will begin at 7 o'clock. It's being attended by Twin Cities District Superintendent Dan Johnson. Dan, welcome. Good to have you here. And he doesn't have a speaking part, but we can ask him all kinds of questions, which I think will be really good because he actually can give us some real insight. I want to spend a moment and go back through. I'm only going to pull out 3 of each of these. We had the most helpful, how to improve, what you have learned, and other thoughts. And everything was tabulated, and that was sent out. I had spent my Sunday afternoon on the computer putting all this together. But there were several things that I wanted to highlight. You can look through them all if you want. They're all important, but there were some I think that were sort of slightly more significant. The most helpful, that it finally started. This started last December, and it had some false starts, so that was important. Each person has the opportunity to speak their concerns, and that's been true too, and that's good. That's, not everybody's going to agree or see things the same way. And then the third one under most helpful, the overall structure keeps things moving, answering questions. RCV works well. The session recap is helpful. Now, how do we improve things? Focus on dreams and be honest with actual problems. Focus on dreams and be honest with actual problems. I thought that was really powerful. More clarity on raising money to pay debt and how to recruit new members. And I wish more people would show up and participate, and you have tonight. So there, amen to that one. You did it. What you have learned. and this is the third one that I thought was pretty helpful here. Despite everything, we are hanging in there strong. We have strong and committed lay leaders, and that has been my experience too. Our UMC affiliation constrains but provides the framework that supports the process. Other thoughts? Will the UMC break free of the chains of conservative thought regarding sexuality and gender, and can Walker be part of that? I want to tell you, you've already been part of it, and you have been a leader in this Minnesota Annual Conference, and the annual conference now has become a reconciling conference, and that happened because of people who had the courage and the faith and the foresight to speak out for justice, and that will be a forever. I get a little personally involved in this. That will be a forever legacy from this congregation. Set up a GoFundMe website for artists to broaden our community base. I thought that was an interesting thing. That was a concept that happened at a table I was sitting at for a few minutes. And then the building is a huge issue and confusing, and we need to discuss it fully and carefully, and we need to be honest and open on money issues. And I think sort of that's what's one of the things that's happening tonight. So those are the ones I highlighted. You could highlight others, but I felt those were important. Now, I've been talking enough for a while. How about anybody want to ask questions or have some response or feedback or thoughts that you'd like to share at this point? And also our friends who are online, we want to include them. We don't want to, and we have a way of patching them into the sound system now, I understand, which is great. So if they want to ask a question, they certainly can do that. Yes, wait a minute, I've got to bring the microphone to you.
Just a quick question. Are there more than two options about the building? Either Walker, we retain ownership, or New City takes...
There's 4 options, and they're all written down there on the list. Thank you. Yeah, there are more than 2 options. Okay, I'm moving over here. Thank you.
I'd like to know who is on Zoom so they can see us. We can know who they are.
Yeah, can you let us know who's on Zoom?
All right, let's see. Looking at the list. All right. We've got David, Christine Smith, Rhonda, Barbara Hager, Cheryl, Dell, who maybe is not Dell. Yeah, and Steve Cobian. And then Barbara says, we want to know who is in the room. So.
Henry, just for the heck of it, that David is Dave Wojcik.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear it properly.
That David is Dave Wojcik, by the way.
Okay. So they want to know who's in the room. So I'm going to pass it around and just say your name, please.
Howard.
Mary.
Jandy Noble.
Nancy Larson.
Fred Glazer.
H. Lou Tofty.
Conrad.
Ed.
Sally Keene.
Mary Parker. Jennifer.
Steve Sandberg.
Don Brown.
Carl.
Jesse Watkins.
Dan Johnson.
Joan Wilson.
Tony Winterstorff.
Paul McHugh.
J. Emily Peabody.
Kent.
David Wheeler and Henry, of course. Okay. Thank you for asking that. It's always good to have that information out there. So, any other questions or thoughts at this point, or we can Okay. And again, introduce yourself so those who are on Zoom will know who's speaking.
Thank you, Jesse Watkins. I'm 93 last Sunday. Okay, thank you. Here are my thoughts. I wrote them down, and it takes about 2 minutes. Without going down divergent paths, I'd like to lift up here the idea that Walker's path to survival and this wonderful building's path, and perhaps that of New City's path, that we're all in the same finish line. We truly feel that together we will stand and can stand, and opposite that divided we will fall, perhaps not continue. Even the thought that perhaps God put us here in the same geography to work together. So the problem is how do you go about it? Collaboration is not easy. It would seem that we could hopefully find a supplemental person to talk with us who has experience in that word merging, so that we can learn by hearing what has happened elsewhere. I'd like to suggest that we find that person. I have in mind a man that probably knows more about collaboration of churches than about anybody in the region. His name is Dave Raymond. He would supplement, say, one time with you, David. Then, without discussion, without examining the issues, we probably can't move very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's why we've been doing all we've been doing with writing and thinking and questioning and making some decisions. Now, does anybody else have a question at this point, or we can move right into the four pieces of the Walker Building options? And you know, Dan, would this be an okay time to sort of ask you to kind of bring us through this because of your yeah, because you know this better. Go ahead.
Is it helpful if I pull my mask to the side so that you can see? It articulates a little bit better here, I think. One, just great to be with you folks again. I want to applaud the hard work that you folks have been doing. 5 of 6 sessions, and you've been moving with a significant discernment and clarity for some decision on where you're headed as a congregation, who you need for leadership, and now tonight we're looking at what kind of relationship do you need with your facility kind of as a tool to accommodate that. I just want to mention that when all of these options were developed, remember they were developed all independently so that you saw the full range of options. Obviously, as you start to make some decisions earlier on and move forward, all these options no longer are just independent but interdependent, depending on which ultimately is selected. But we're going to take some time to review all of these. So, and we have models for this in our Twin Cities district for other sister congregations of yours that are exploring all of these. Churches that have been kind of declining to some measure and are kind of on the bubble financially, but still want to maintain that foothold in their community and exploring retaining the building. That would be one option for you. I know that you're talking about either remaining as a United Methodist Church, or secondarily, I think a fellowship might have been in that mix. So for somehow or other, you're going to need a place to continue to meet. Walker could continue to just own this building and maintain it. Other churches are doing that. But recognizing some of the challenges you've had of late, if you'd want to do that, you'd want to have an honest assessment of all the resources necessary to maintain it yourself, and that's not just financial, but that's also the human resources for managing that as well, and also to assess whether that's owning it is really important for where you're headed in the future. So missionally and administratively, a plan that could address both of those. A couple of churches that are currently doing this process. Columbia Heights, Community Church in Columbia Heights is exploring this very thing. So is Epworth, your neighboring church here in South Minneapolis. Exploring whether or not, how they might retain the building and other ways to be able to do that, to make that affordable, including broadening their community partnerships, something that you folks have already been doing, but how to do that in some more intentional ways in order to help make that a sustainable decision. Selling the building is another option. And there's several different models for that. If Walker discontinued as a church, but that's not one that rose up to a high level of support, from my understanding from prior. So let me just walk through all these, and then we'll circle back. I'll just give a brief overview, and then we'll answer some questions. So selling the building, you could do that outright and reinvest the funds to be used in some other way to support a place for you to relocate to. We have Aldersgate United Methodist Church currently that just did that. They sold to a developer out in St. Louis Park for kind of life cycle housing for seniors, and they have they sold for about when all said and done, $2.5 million or so after all the management fees and everything and all the sale realtor fees were covered. They are now meeting for the interim in a building with a Lutheran congregation while they kind of reimagine their future and what kind of facility they'll need for the future. But they had a very large, sprawling campus, and for those that might be familiar with Aldersgate and St. Louis Park, with big old Sunday school wing that wasn't being used anymore, and now they're looking at right-sizing. And so they sold their building and will reinvest in some other way. But that they do lose that missional footprint in that particular area. If Walker chooses not to remain a legal entity, so if you would become a fellowship, for instance, and are no longer an incorporated entity, you could sell, and the resources could be reallocated as a legacy gift for a future United Methodist ministry. We have, some churches did that with our Reach, Renew, Rejoice campaign and reinvested in congregational development funds, or invested in congregational development funds then that helped us to launch new congregations. Building sale and use of proceeds requires some approval of several different offices, including mine, the District Board of Church Location, and building and the appointed cabinet. We work together toward an end that the congregation desires. You could gift the building to another United Methodist congregation. I'm going to circle back. New City actually has a wonderful kind of vision statement that I think got distributed to everybody in advance. Hopefully you had a chance to read that, but this wouldn't be the first time that it's happened. In St. Anthony Park was a struggling older congregation. They realized they probably didn't have a future on their own, so they gifted their facility, in fact, even themselves, to the Centennial United Methodist Church in Roseville. Centennial adopted that site as a satellite campus, remodeled and renovated that area, that particular facility, reopened and relaunched, and now it's a growing congregation in that same area once again, with about a third, with about 120 or so in attendance, and about a third of those are former St. Anthony Park folks, about a third are our Roseville campus folks that just wanted a more contemporary service option, and about a third to half now are actually brand new people to attending that congregation. That happened over the course of about a year and a half, about 18 months from the point of decision making to reopening and launching. So that's happening at St. Anthony Park. A model very similar to what you're thinking about with New City happened in St. Paul with the St. Paul Epworth congregation and the Beloved, which is a multicultural congregation. The Beloved was meeting in the building, very same thing is happening with the New City meeting in your building. Epworth was no longer able to care for their facility, so they gifted the title over to the Beloved as a new church start. They took the responsibility over for property maintenance and management, oversight of the ministry partners that were in the building. In this case, the Epworth folks didn't continue to meet as an independent congregation anymore. They kind of scattered. So a few of them stayed in the building with the Beloved. A few of them went to Christ Church in Maplewood. A few of them went to some other denominational churches. But that's an example of a existing church gifting their building over to a new church start that's continuing to meet there in that same location. And then let me just say a word about donating the building to another nonprofit entity, and then we'll come back again in a little bit more detail, answering your questions on all these and looking more closely at the New City proposal. Donating the building to another nonprofit entity, with Minnesota Conference approval, the facility could be donated to another nonprofit somehow affiliated with United Methodist Work and Witness. So you folks actually own the building, you have title to the building, you have responsibility for it. That said, you've probably heard of this thing called the trust clause. It's part of our denomination. If you cease to exist as a United Methodist Church, then those resources stay within the United Methodist system. So the Minnesota Conference becomes caretakers of that asset until it's reinvested again in another United Methodist local church. So it's to try to maintain assets within our United Methodist ministry. That said, we certainly have cases where we have gifted a building or those, well, in this case, yeah, or the site to another United Methodist entity. The most recent on the Twin Cities district was with Simpson United Methodist Church. Yeah, close relation to you. I mean, you used to be paired with Simpson as a 2-point charge. And they also, a massive edifice there that smaller congregation could no longer care for, but they had a long-standing relationship with Simpson Housing Services. And so we went through a process for them to be able to donate their building and their site. Really, it's the site that was of greatest value to Simpson Housing Services, which is another United Methodist related ministry. And they accepted that gift, and they're now in the process of a development plan to essentially raise that building and rebuild a state-of-the-art center for health and wellness on that corner. And that's it requires a number of city approvals. Our gift of the land was certainly instrumental to them maintaining a foothold in that community. But that said, the whole project is around $25 million, and so there was a lot of public and other private investment in this cause. So we haven't broken ground yet, but we're looking at next summer probably for groundbreaking on that new facility. So that's an example of donated to another kind of United Methodist entity. That's a quick overview. By the way, I know David Raymond well. I've worked with him on other. He's a great consultant out of the Lutheran tradition, but he has done a lot of ecumenical work, and he's worked closely with us on several of these things. In fact, has had a hand in some of the vision of the predecessor work that I just described here. Did you have a chance to read the New City proposal? So I won't take time to read all that, but at this point, with that as just a little bit of background, just entertain any questions you have. And Tyler sends his both regrets and best wishes to all of you. He wasn't able to be here tonight, but I think between David and I and Henry, we can answer questions on behalf of New City as well, because we have met closely with Tyler to get a good idea of what their congregation intends to, if you would happen to go in that direction. Yeah. So repeat the question here.
Sure. I'll dance it around. Go ahead.
No. What was the process with Joyce Churches dissolving and what's going with the property now, or how that turned out?
Should I use this one, and then you have one for, would that work?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Speak into that one.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for asking about Joyce. And actually, I could share a word about Wesley Church, too. We had two others with, Wesley Church downtown, where we had similar situations where the congregations were no longer able to care for the buildings. So, so Joyce Church was also a congregation on the decline. They made the decision to become a fellowship, and they met for another, I'd say, 5 years as a fellowship. Bill Morton, a retired United Methodist clergy that some of you may know, faithfully led that little fellowship. About a dozen of them continued to meet in sometimes by the lake, by the shores of the lake, sometimes in public meeting spaces, and sometimes in some homes until those folks just really couldn't hardly get out anymore. And so it was just last summer was the last time that they met, so they ended up closing as a fellowship. So that was their decision, and then because they were a fellowship and no longer an incorporated entity, they gifted that building essentially back to the Minnesota Conference. We experimented with a couple of ministries there. Two different versions of an uptown outreach. Most notably, the one that lasted the longest went for about 8 years. Jeremiah Ledeen was the founding pastor of what was called Uptown Church. They met in that building. They tried to develop some ministry partners, but their largest one, the preschool, Joyce Preschool, you may know, actually relocated to Park Avenue United Methodist Church. That's kind of another story, but that was a significant factor in the viability of that facility for a new church start. So that was one of the pieces. Another is that the Joyce Church launched a food shelf too, and that's excellent. That's still going, serving that community. But the new church start, that was too much overhead for the new church all at once, that big building and the food shelf. So they gifted the food shelf to Lake Harriet United Methodist Church. That's actually the owner-operators of that church, of that house now, and that's going well. That's been kind of redesigned. That's doing well. Uptown Church, when they could, they didn't have the growth trajectory that New City had. We're learning things. Sometimes we succeed, and sometimes we don't. It reached about, grew to the point of about 50 or so young adults that were meeting regularly through the Uptown ministry. But young adults, in many cases, are kind of transient folks without a commitment to the neighborhood, and so it gradually dwindled. They moved out of the Joyce facility to the Phoenix Theater, where they met. It was much more low cost for them, only about $800 a month to meet at the Phoenix Theater. But then they closed within, in fact, I was with them for their final service just a month ago. So that actually got sold to another developer. The building itself, yep.
So what I would really like, you have a question online? We're going to have table talk about these options. There are 4 options before us, and we're going to have to talk about that in your tables, and then we'll maybe take 10 minutes to do that. But if you have a quick question or two that Dan might answer, or is the online people, do they have one?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Go ahead, put Christine Smith on. I don't need to speak more.
Am I on?
You're on, Christine.
All right. I've been very quiet and not participating in these discussions because I wanted everybody else to come to their conclusions without me being part of it. But when it comes to what we do with the building, I want to remind everybody, when you think how wonderful it will be to gift the building to New City or anybody else, or even turn it back to the Methodist Church, there is a $250,000 loan that I hold that I would like to see repaid.
Yep.
So we would certainly need to recognize the lien against the building for the $250,000. Christine, I wish I could see you in person. We haven't really talked this all through. I don't know if that lien is still there, if the Walker congregation retains it as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's a lien that needs to be repaid either way. The Minnesota Conference would have a direct involvement in repaying that if it should be gifted to a new church start. It would probably, if it were gifted to another United Methodist entity, I would think that we would say that the $250,000 lien would be that other entity's responsibility to pay back if it wasn't a new church start.
No, wait, we have to use the microphone, excuse me.
We have about 141,000 in a parsonage fund from the sale of the old parsonage. Since the $250,000 loan was to finish the building, could that parsonage fund be used to pay down the capital on that loan?
Yes, a parsonage fund technically can't be used for operational expenses unless there's a clear redevelopment plan that's presented, in which case some exceptions can be made. But otherwise, the Book of Discipline requires that capital assets be used for capital expenses. So if you wanted to redirect the parsonage fund as partial payment of the remaining loan on the facility, yes, that retirement would be appropriate use of that.
Yes.
I don't know if this is the time to do it, but Carol McGarry asked me to give her perspective on some of this. Is it okay if I were to do that now? It's a short perspective. Carol couldn't be here tonight. Is that okay? Should we do it after we all talk as part of another report?
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe
fine.
keep this for questions for clarification, and then all of you are going to talk at your tables, I think.
Yeah.
Next.
If you have a question, I'll bring you the microphone.
Well, I think that continuing to ask questions, if there are any, is the best, because if we get to our small table, we're just going to have questions, and this is where the answers are. I very much appreciated you giving examples of other churches and what has happened, and that would be helpful for me to, if you could continue on any other examples, like if could we invite another congregation here? Would that be a possibility? Is the one question that comes to mind, but.
Yes, we have many United Methodist churches that host other congregations, not necessarily United Methodist, but if that's the question. So are you asking, in addition to New City being housed here, could you house yet another church or two? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the trust clause that, say if at some point certain Methodist churches decide they don't want to be part of the United Methodist Church anymore, and I mean, Walker's kind of a poor church with a big debt. That's one situation there. I'm assuming there's probably richer churches without any debt. How does that get sorted out if those churches you decide not to be United Methodists anymore? Is there some envisionment of how that might work out?
Yeah, we do have current provisions for disaffiliation that allows churches to exit with their facility right now under paragraph 2553 of the Book of Discipline. You won't find it in your 2016 discipline, which is the last hard copy one that was produced, because we haven't actually had an official general conference since then. But there was there was an intervening legislation that was approved by a special session of General Conference that allowed for the exit of churches. And so if a church chooses to disaffiliate, if they satisfy some other financial obligations, the two largest being a payment of apportionments for the past year and the current year, and then also paying their unfunded liability of their responsibility for the pastor's pension fund of those clergy that have served them in the past, then they can exit with their building and the trust clause is released.
And in fact, three churches in the Minnesota Annual Conference have disaffiliated and have left the Minnesota Annual Conference. Am I correct?
Yep.
So that has already happened because they were very much opposed to the openness of the conference to people who are gay and lesbian and transgender. And
the limitations of that disaffiliation, though, are to exit for reasons related to human sexuality. And so if for churches that would disagree with the direction that the Minnesota Annual Conference is headed, ironically, you folks have actually, as David said, have actually launched the Minnesota Conference into a much more progressive witness, so we are no longer kind of at odds in terms of core values with Walker. We're really quite aligned.
And our very first session, we dealt with all four things from staying a United Methodist Church, becoming a fellowship, disaffiliating, or discontinuing. And there was one vote for the last two, and all the votes were at the very beginning. So we talked about it at our very first session. So
great questions. A few more over here.
Here we go.
I love New City, and I'm very intrigued by the New City proposal. My question is basically just to clarify, in these four options we just finished hearing about, none of them seem to match exactly what New City is saying in their vision statement or whatever it's called, because instead of them owning the building, they would found an independent nonprofit to own it. So can you, at least that's what I'm reading here. If
well,
New
or
City,
to
to
operate.
We would look to found an independent nonprofit to manage. I see.
Right.
They would own it but not manage. Okay, got
yeah,
it.
that's the nuanced piece there. The proposal really falls pretty directly under the third item, gift the building to another United Methodist congregation. What New City is saying, because the vision is to be a building for the community, that this separate nonprofit would provide more level ground, level playing field for all of the community partners to access and schedule the building, and so kind of rather than it being a tenant relationship. But yeah, technically behind the scenes, New City would be the owner, and they'll be a legal entity. They're becoming our first new chartered church in a couple of years now, and they're actually chartering on September 11th.
Wow.
That's exciting, and thank you for helping incubate them.
Yeah. I have a question. Are there any other examples of fellowships in Minnesota?
Yes, many fellowships. Fellowships are most common at the beginning and the end of church life cycles. So we've been talking a lot about fellowships at the end of church life cycles, like maybe for you folks. I just talked about Joyce a little bit ago. We have a church, Silver Lake United Methodist Church, also in the Twin Cities District, previously in Oakdale, sold their building and became a fellowship, and they are meeting in a variety of just public places, like the community room of library, VFW hall, sometimes by lakes, and developing a small group model of ministry. So rather than just one, they are now two different small groups with both a ritual gathering time as well as a missional outreach components. So they're looking at how can we be church without the overhead of a building, and they're finding, virtually all of their contributions can go to direct witness in the community. On the beginning side of the life cycle, we have a lot of them. Many of them are communities of color, That's been our growing edge. So we have we have a Faith Vietnamese fellowship, we have a Haitian fellowship, we have a Hmong fellowship, we have a Karen fellowship that are not yet. They may be eventually a chartered church, but they are not yet, and actually maybe never will be, because they don't want the overhead of that sometimes goes with that. They're not assigned apportionments. They can just voluntarily make apportionments and things like that.
Any of them have clergy?
Yes.
Any of them have clergy?
Yes. Silver Lake has an ordained elder, 3/4 time, serving them in the house church model. Steve Reiser, if you know Steve. Our fellowships that are church communities of color, primarily first-generation immigrant communities, those are usually licensed local pastors. In fact, I think in all cases those are licensed local pastors that are serving them, where we've either recruited a pastor to come in and serve part-time, or they've raised up a leader out of their own faith community.
I think there's an online. Okay, you have a question. All right, Henry.
I want to make sure my sound is okay on Zoom. My question is just with regards to the this debt that we have related to the building. In the situation, if Walker gave the building to New City, obviously that's still very much in the conference's interest. Would the conference or New City have any abilities to help out with that debt as well?
We would want to partner with you. What I will say is I would want to partner with you in addressing that responsibility for that note. So, for instance, I'm just talking out loud. So don't hold me to this. But what I would look at proposing is maybe even a three-way kind of thing, where what if let's just make it $300,000. I know it's only $250 or whatever, but what if Walker put in $100,000 toward that debt reduction? The Congregational Development Office put in $100,000 toward that debt reduction, and New City still had took out a mortgage. You know, for a new church start to get a beautiful building like this for $100,000, that's a steal. I started a new church in Maple Grove, and we were in debt for 20 years on the property land purchase and the first unit of the building that wasn't even as big as this. And so that would be a great gift to New City, but they're obviously not here. But I would think it would be appropriate to have skin in the game for everybody involved. Is that fair to say? And by the way, I hope you saw in there that when we've done this before, it's very common for the gifting congregation to have actually written in the contractual transfer of title kind of the ability to meet in perpetuity in that facility. Because it's like you're paying your rent in advance by making this wonderful contribution for the future.
It seems obvious.
Oh, we have a question over here. Sorry. Listen up, please.
It's not a question so much as a comment. It seems obvious to me that if you could find a seamless joining of these two congregations, you simply have a house for us, as a sort of a new church. I don't see then why you wouldn't have a fifth option and to explore that. I wonder if there's anybody here who could speak to the matter of whether New City and its leadership would be open to sitting down with a exploration of what it might take to come together.
Oh, a merger of the two congregations?
I'll respond to that. Let me do that. I don't, having been around the church for a long time, that doesn't work because they're completely different histories, traditions, organizations, structures, theologies. I could keep going on and on and on and on. I think you can share a facility beautifully, There are all sorts of ways of sharing a facility, and there are all sorts of ways of being supportive of one another. The idea of a merger would end up would not work well. I'm just saying that from what I have seen in many places and what I have come to understand here. Yeah. Yeah. All right, just I'll bring the microphone to you. Now we've moved from questions to comments.
This is to Jesse's question, why we don't do a fifth option and do a merger. I agree with David generally, except Living Spirit was a successful merger of two declining, very declining United Methodist churches that had different missions, but it's taking them years to really work out a lot of the kinks to be the diverse, functional community they are now. What happens is in most mergers, the energy spirals down to the weakest connecting organization. And so New City's on a New City thing, and we wouldn't want to burden them with old stuff. Oh, that's a bad way to put it. You know, just other baggage.
Well, you still have vitality and purpose as well as a congregation. Yeah, so
This place kind of rocks. I mean, it's really fun. We're going to be voting in 5 minutes, so we're not doing any table talk. You pretty much decided you didn't want to. Are there any further questions before we hand ballots out? I can't, I'm sorry, just a second. Here.
Read Carol's input.
Go ahead.
Okay, from Carol McGarry. Sorry I can't be with you, but made other plans some weeks ago. Here are some thoughts regarding the New City Church proposal. Number one, this is a good thing in that the idea of the two congregations working and planning together intuitively seems like a good idea. We may have some cultural differences, but I suspect we have more in common. That said, there's no magic here that I can see. Certainly we could set up a separate nonprofit to manage the building, but that would have its own issues. Who would be the manager? How would the manager be paid and how much? What part of the management fees would Walker be required to pay? What if the management fees could not reasonably be managed out of the income, out of rental income and equitable contributions from each congregation? Part of our problem now is the cost of cooling, heating, and maintaining this lovely building, not to mention trash hauling and janitorial services. Personnel problems happen. You have a functioning manager 1 month, and then he or she quits. And finally, what about the debt to Christine Smith? Would New City assume responsibility for that, even if Christine remains willing to be paid only interest, some $16,000 per year, if memory serves? I do not see how this discussion can get much farther without involving Christine and having her tell us what she is and is not willing to do about this debt. Hi, Christine.
Well, I think I heard very clearly that that $250,000 is the responsibility of this congregation, and that's going to get taken care of, no matter what happens. That has to be taken care of.
this congregation and the broader United Methodist connection that is a part of you.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
I guess the other thing I just meant, some excellent points in terms of implementation. I'd encourage, I think tonight we're just about casting vision for direction. We have to recognize that any one of these options would require significant work before implementation would happen. So a lot of the details about, cost,
yep.
How the property is managed, that would be worked out over the course of the coming year.
You had a question?
Yeah, that is still my sentiment. So if I understand this correctly, we're voting in a sense to acknowledge New City's proposal here, and we need to explore this because I don't see, like I said, it's like a kettle of fish, or we're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So in other words, and
they're a young church, so I don't know what their financial capabilities are, you know, how strong they can, and when those meetings would start taking place. But without us generally acknowledging that, which is what we think we're doing tonight, it seems like the most viable other alternative, other than leaving the sale and, you know, dissolution of this whole community, just to square away some financial matters, et cetera, et cetera.
It's been great,
Henry? Oh, I'm
great
sorry.
questions. Thank you.
Henry, do you have the ballots? Okay, and then we're going to get the ballots out. You have 4 choices. We've reviewed all 4. You don't, you know, and you will be ranking them. And when we have the ballot in hand, I'm going to go through it one more time for you. Just a second. You had an online question here. I heard that first.
Christine has one more thing to share. So I think Christine can go ahead.
Be glad to hear from you, Christine. Please.
Yeah, I end up being a big cheese and not by my own wishes. This is not how I planned for things to go. I have never called in the debt because I believe in Walker and what Walker is to me more than I believe in money. I have supported Walker with both my funds and my sweat and my heart. I do not want to kill it. I simply want to be paid because I want to use the money for other things.
Thank you. We're getting the ballots out. Howard, do you have something that is important?
A clarification. Correct me if I'm wrong, but we're not actually voting on the new city proposal.
No.
I will be explaining all of it. Absolutely not. We're not voting on the new city proposal. That was handed to you so that you could see what that community is thinking about, who's close to you. There are 4 choices that you have, and let's go right through them here. The first choice, second choice, third choice. You can choose that Walker continues to own and operate the building. Or you can choose that Walker will sell the building outright. Or you can choose that we will gift the building to another United Methodist Church. And that is probably New City Church. Or you could gift the building to a nonprofit. Those are the 4 choices. Now, with ranked choice voting, we did rank the last one, and it did make a difference. So if you choose, for instance, I'm going to give an example. If you choose that you want to gift the building to another United Methodist Church as your first choice, your second choice cannot be the same one. It has to be a different choice. And I would recommend that you don't have to do all 3 choices, but I strongly recommend you do a second choice, because I think there will be sort of a mixture as people respond to this. Again, this is not the final word, but it gives a sense of where you all are in terms of this. So your first choice, the second choice must be different than your first choice, and if you do a third choice, it can't be either the first or the second choice. Is that clear? Any question about that? Yes? Just a second, I'll come to you so you can ask the question.
My funny bone, you know, if we go with building another or gifting it to the the main church, the mother church, or a nonprofit, then how does how will New City actually fill in? It just seemed to me we kind of they got shafted there.
Absolutely, no. They're a United Methodist Church. Don't. Yes. We heard there being. Yeah. Yep. No, there's another question over here. Sorry.
I can confidently say that if you say gifted to another United Methodist Church, there's no other United Methodist Church right now that is looking at a mission in this area other than New City, so, but we just didn't put their name on the list.
Say if you really know, if a person really knows what they want to do and doesn't want to give any other part of their vote to any of the other choices, if you just put your favorite one and don't do any second or third choice, is that a valid vote?
It is valid, but you lose your power, and you have more power if you do a second vote. If you bullet vote and it loses, it's done. So you don't have any second choice at all. If you don't have a second choice, don't put it down, but I strongly recommend that you do that. Okay, just a second.
This is just a clarifying question from Cheryl. Cheryl said that these votes and the earlier votes were straw polls.
Yes, they are. As I said, they're straw polls. Absolutely, they're straw polls. However, they are indicative of people who have attended, people who have been part of it, people who wanted to help make a decision, and so it will guide final decisions, but it does not lock it down. It's advisory. But that's a good way. It's part of the process. Does everybody have their vote handed in? Still, you are good at picking up those votes. You're not going to stuff any ballots anywhere, are you? Every ballot is handed in. So, there should be one ballot for one person. That's so, everybody, I'm going to send you forth in just a moment. Could I have everybody's attention for just a minute, please? We're going to need help returning all of these tables and chairs upstairs. Henry and I were the ones who brought them all down. And if any of you have a few minutes to help us with that, they go up and down the elevator, fortunately. You don't have to carry them up. Friends, thank you. You have been patient. You've been patient. You've taken time to be here. You've taken time to vote. You love and care for your congregation. And I think, as one of the statements said, there's lots of life here yet, and there is. And now, as we go forth from this time, let us go forth in the knowledge of the one who loves and cares for us. Let us go forth in the knowledge that we are called to work together for peace and for justice, that we have been a beacon to our Minnesota Annual Conference. Thank you. Go in peace. Amen.